Welcome to the show, guys. Today we have a very special episode planned. We have Scott Rieckens with us today. Now, Scott has spent the last decade leading teams on everything from creative concept to brand strategy and production. He is the founder of 99 Bravo Productions, which is based out of San Diego, California. His work over the past decade has generated literally millions of views, 2 Emmy nominations, and countless other awards. Most notably, he directed the documentary Inventing to Nowhere, aiming to dispel mythical attacks on America's intellectual property landscape. Scott's been trusted by some of the biggest brands in the world, including Facebook, NBC, Taylor Guitars, Fox, Microsoft, and Wired Magazine. Now, I got to say that even in a vacuum, this would be very impressive. But this is wonderful for us and wonderful for the FI community because Scott is actually setting aside the next year of his life to focus on producing Playing with Fire, a documentary that uncovers the growing community of frugalists, mustachians, and valuists choosing a path to financial independence and early retirement. And I'm going to plug this right now. If you want to learn more about this project and his work, you can go to playingwithfire.co, playingwithfire.co, and you can get all the latest updates. He initially reached out to us several months ago to let us know that this is a project that he was interested in looking into, and we have done everything that we could to support that process. And as a result of that, we wanted to bring him back on the show today and give you a behind-the-scenes look at his entire journey, how he found FI, how he found the rabbit hole, where he's coming from, and where he's going with this. So this is a very personal, intimate look at what this journey is actually going to look like for him. And also, as this is going to directly affect us, because FI has never had a documentary, although it's shocking to say, this stealth wealth community is finally going to get its airtime on a mainstream format that cannot be ignored. And it's very cool to be able to be behind the scenes on this and get a chance to watch it as it grows. And without any further ado, welcome to the ChooseFI Radio Podcast.
You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to be featuring an interview from Scott Rieckens. And the reason we're featuring this is because Scott reached out to us several months ago to say basically that he has felt the pull to actually give up a year of his life and create a documentary around the FI community. And what is it that we always say? The fire is spreading. Scott found the rabbit hole within the last year and went deep down into it, and it transformed his life and frankly, that of his family as well. And he's making radical changes based on the information that he learned and that he's incorporating into every aspect of his life. So for 2 reasons, we felt that this was an extremely important episode. 1, to go ahead and get a chance to explore the decisions that Scott has made over the past year and the impact that it's had on him and his immediate family. But then also in the broader context, to go ahead and explore what it looks like to actually give up a year of your life and dedicate it to creating a documentary around this amazing concept, this amazing community, to explore the perimeters of these wildly interesting characters that don't exist in mainstream America, that you just don't know about. And you don't know what you don't know until you do. And how incredible would it be to take this message that we all are so passionate about and see it put on a mainstream format like Netflix or Amazon Prime? That's the power of this conversation today. I have Brad here with me in the studio. How you doing, Brad?
I am doing great, Jonathan. Yeah, this is exciting. We've gotten to know Scott real well over the last couple of months, and just a good guy, and yeah, can't wait to really share him with the broader FI community.
So Scott's here with us in the studio as well. How you doing, Scott?
Hi, guys. I'm doing great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely thrilled. This is a conversation that we have been wanting to have. We've been trying to figure out how to do it in the right way. And frankly, Brad and I came to the conclusion that ultimately we should just start with your story and how you found this rabbit hole. Do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about your background and how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how far back I want to go, but my wife and I, we've been working hard really since high school, and we've done well for ourselves. And I think in due part because we've had a lot of opportunity and our parents have taught us well and set us up so that we knew debt was bad and we knew we needed to go to college and we needed to work hard and get our homework done and things like that. But through all of that, we also have a bit of a wanderlust and adventure streak. And, we moved around quite a bit. I was a Navy brat growing up and I moved around a lot. And my wife and I both share that excitement for travel and adventure. And we ended up finding ourselves on a little island called Coronado off of San Diego. It's a pretty ideal place. We've got beach, we've got palm trees. We're next to a major metropolitan city that's growing. For all intents and purposes, it's awesome. But despite all of that, there was always this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. A nagging feeling that it felt like the more success that we were finding and the harder we were working, the more would come up and the busier we would get. And the next thing you know, we had a baby and our lives changed completely. Our obligations started to mount, our priorities changed. And man, I felt like we were on a hamster wheel, as the FI community calls it. And I would wake up in the morning, kiss my wife and kid, and I would head out the door to pay for this lifestyle. But I was rarely enjoying it myself. And when I would actually get the time to enjoy it, I couldn't shake this feeling. And so for me, I always knew that it was about financial independence. I always knew if we had financial independence that we could make decisions outside of the scope of financial gain. And for me, the only logical explanation to do that was to come up with some $1 million idea, to come up with some new invention. And frankly, I've been working on that for years. I have 1 million of them. They're all ridiculous. And I would think about pursuing one here or there, and I'd start stoking the flames and call some of my friends or people I knew that I thought could help me or get something done. But it would always kind of fizzle because I'd also have to focus on my day job. And being an entrepreneur, you want to be careful not juggling too many things at once.
I love what you have come to recognize over that journey. And what I'm seeing is that when you look at most of these entrepreneur type websites, most of these side hustle type websites, in a vacuum, it's just earn more. It's very one-dimensional. The way you beat the game is to come up with one single idea that's $1 million idea, and you break the game because you've made millions and millions of dollars. That's what I see almost everybody striving to do. What we've recognized, and where I think we're going to go with this, is the missing piece was always starting from a strong financial base. And it gives you so much more freedom because it frees you from the hamster wheel, which then allows you to then tackle that other side, that entrepreneurial side again, right?
That's exactly right. And I think what's really interesting about all of that you just mentioned is the entrepreneurial side. There seems to be an entrepreneurial bent to all of this. I think you guys just had Alan on a little while ago. And the whole side hustle thing being such a major pillar of FI, it's really interesting. I think a lot of people have probably gone down a similar path as I have, but just maybe haven't gone this one step further to find FI. And I ended up diving into the startup culture. And for me, I'm actually a bit of a podcast junkie. I'm really a Reddit browser. And I really like to read. I'm not so much of a blog reader, or I hadn't been. And I had dove down the rabbit hole of podcasts and found a lot of side hustle type podcasts that focus on startup culture or raising money. The Dorm Room Tycoon was one. Pat Flynn's podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. And that all took me down a rabbit hole. I also, being in the creative space, listened to Chase Jarvis Live when they first came out. And that is when I found Tim Ferriss. And I was aware of Tim Ferriss via the 4-Hour Workweek, but I never read it. I just would always see it on the shelf at various marketing agencies or co-working spaces that I was around, but hadn't actually read the book. And I started listening to his podcast. And this was right around the time that we had our baby and we were in the middle of a move, and I had a lot of time to listen. And so I took a deep dive into the Tim Ferriss podcast and learned a ton. But at the same time, through all of this learning, I never hit on an idea that I found was impactful enough or big enough to really pursue to the extent that I knew I would need to succeed. And that brought a ton of stress.
it's that component that when you're trying to just increase your income to outpace your lifestyle creep, and with every additional dollar you get, you just get the next thing on that bucket list that inevitably has some cost attached to it, and usually it's recurring cost. And so the bar keeps getting raised, which then raises the ante for the level of side hustle or business that you need to create, or the level of awesomeness of the next idea you need to have. And when you're just looking at the problem with that from that one dimension, you can't win.
And guys, if anybody knows anything about lifestyle creep, it's me. When my wife and I moved here to Coronado, our first place was 565 square feet. All right. We lived really minimally. We kept our bikes on our patio. We didn't have kids. We lived in a little one bedroom with our dog, and we paid, I think, something like $900 or $1,100 a month, which at that time, it was 2012, it was at the bottom of the market, and that was expensive for us. It was very expensive for us. And through the 5 years that we've lived here in Coronado, we've upgraded 3 times. And each time the rent would go up, and we would have other additional expenses. And then we had more space, so we'd buy things to fill that space. If anybody knows lifestyle creep, it's me. And we got all the way to the point where we are living in a 3-bedroom, 3-bath. It's about 1,400 square feet. We're paying $2,850 a month. And I'm looking at that going, I think that's like a mortgage on a 15-year mortgage on a maybe $425,000, $450,000 home.
Wow. That's crazy. Hey, Scott, so that's tripling your living expense in just a handful of years, right? So you went from 900 and change to 2,800. So, I mean, talk us through, because we're always curious about like the psychology behind why people make decisions, right? So like you guys, I assume many of these 3 moves happened before your child was born, right? Like talk us through the actual decision making on, hey, we have this 560 some odd square foot place. Like, why do we need the bigger place? Why do we need the next bigger place? I'm just curious, if you don't mind.
Not at all. The first place, I think we had a pretty good reason. We secured the place before we actually moved here. And what we learned later was that we were living on the road where the ambulance would come drop people off at the ER. And
nice.
So in the middle of the night, we were getting woken up quite often.
I'm someone who sleeps in like a hermetically sealed room, essentially, like with white noise machines and stuff. So yeah, I can understand not wanting an ambulance right next door.
That is hilarious. I actually remember at the Camp Mustache that we were at the beginning of the year, Brad actually moved out of the room that he was in and found a closet in an abandoned area of the building.
And yes, I literally slept in a closet. But it was great. I had a single.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you guys get it.
I get it. That's intense. I can definitely understand that first move.
Yeah, the first move makes sense to me too. But as we started to look around the island, the other thing was we had been here for about a year and a half, and we had kind of found our place here and started making more money. So we had a little more money to spend. And, you start looking around and going, well, if we spent this much a month, what could we get? And this much a month, what could we get? So we found this high rise just south of the iconic Hotel Del, right on the beach. They've got like 9 different towers with 5 pools, and the pools are right on the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it's an insanely beautiful place to live. It was just kind of a special place. And it was on the 9th floor. We had a view of the bay, and on the other side was the ocean. It was pretty insane. And obviously, we could talk ourselves into justifying a higher rent to live there. And that just continues. Once you move in there, you got to have some stand-up paddle boards. You've got to get your surfboards. You've got to get a rack on your vehicle to transport those around. That's one of a million examples. And the next thing you know, we're not really saving a whole lot more, even though we're making a whole lot more. And that has continued all the way up. And now with a child, to be honest, that place was something like 700 or 800 square feet, and it was a little tight. We had a little Harry Potter baby. She was living in the closet. We sort of redecorated our closet to be a little nursery, and it really worked for us for a while. But we saw the writing on the wall. Our baby was going to grow, and the closet wasn't going to work anymore. So.
Covered under the stairs, right?
Quite literally. So we definitely needed to find more space, but what a daunting task once again. And remember, this is now a couple more years down the road, and the economy's improved and people are moving here, and the secret's out. Coronado is definitely a place that everybody or a lot of people have heard of at this point. And honestly, I remember when our beach won like #1 beach in the country 3 years ago, I want to say. And I'll never forget that summer. It was chaos. I mean, the amount of people walking down Orange Avenue was incredible.
You've never been so disappointed to get recognition for something for a place that you live. It felt like a stab in the gut.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is something to a best kept secret, and it is no longer a best kept secret. And so trying to get out of that tower and onto the island with a little more space was daunting. We ended up making it work. My parents living here for so long, they had some connections, and we knew someone who had a place, and we ended up getting in. What's really funny is it's an amazingly reasonable price for the island. $2,850 a month for a 3-bedroom, 3-bath, 1,400 square foot place with no yard.
Can I just pause you on that and just say for a second, what you just said there is the logic that I think millions of people use to just stay fixed in their current environment, and they never look outside of that. And they say, well, everybody in this geographic area is paying $3,600 or $4,000 for something about the same price. Because I'm paying $2,850, we just shouldn't complain. This is perfect. And you're never willing to look outside of that. And I think what's interesting about where this story may be going soon is that when you do decide that construct is false, and you decide to take a further step out, you can turn the game on its head. And many people will never consider this. They just won't. They won't even take a second look at it.
I totally agree. And so, to get back to my little journey, once I found Tim Ferriss's podcast, that was just a daily listen for me, or weekly. And one day, I'll never forget it. It was February 13th of this year. Mr. Money Mustache pops up, how to live frugally on $25,000 to $27,000 a year. That podcast literally opened my eyes. I was listening to this and thinking, what? These are ideas that I always dreamed of, but never knew existed. And then to find out as I started diving down that rabbit hole that there was a whole network of people focused on hacking the system and living a life of happiness by gaining financial independence. That was actually a line I hadn't drawn yet for myself. The idea that you could pursue a life of happiness and focus less on your financial gain or how much you're making or what kind of cash you're bringing in, but that this was really all a pursuit of happiness. That was amazing to me. And the other side of it was this idea of retiring early. I'd never heard of that before, other than people who would hit it big or get their startup funded and then sell for billions or things like that. And what's really funny too is I wonder if other people have had the same nagging thought. But I'd hear about people making tons of money, $5-10 million exits, and they were still grinding it out. You'd hear about them later, especially on all those startup podcasts I was listening to. You'd hear about them just grinding and stressing over the next big idea. And I always thought to myself, if I did that, I would be going and buying my cute little place in that sort of small to medium-sized town, and that would be it. I mean, but that being said, as an aspiring jack of all trades, master of none, early retirement means I'd have more time with my family and more time to pursue interesting trades and crafts and experiments and things that strike me daily. And that to me sounded like, I don't know, the best life. And so this just totally resonated with me on levels that I'm sure most people can understand on this podcast. But
you're definitely talking to a very friendly audience. And I think a lot of us are soaking this idea up right along with you.
And it's interesting to me that you listen to these podcasts and you thought, while you had these thoughts in your mind, you thought it was impossible, right? You thought it was, I need to have an exit for $10 million to do this. And then I assume, because I listened to that Tim Ferriss episode as well, and I know that the number is nowhere near 5 to 10 million for Mr. Money Mustache. So, I mean, that must have just really caused like this paradigm shift in your mind to, wow, this is impossible, or, oh, this is for a select tiny minority of people, to, wow, maybe this is conceivable in my own life.
That's exactly where I went, Brad. And yes, that's exactly how I felt. To not only hear about ways to reposition the way we think about our spending, and that's something we'd always thought about, we talked about, we downloaded Mint. I had started to attempt to set up budgets and things like that, but we would always kind of fall off the wagon and not really take it seriously. A couple of months, we decided, let's give ourselves $500 cash a month, and we were trying to find ways to rein in our spending responsibly and whatnot. But, there was never a huge incentive to, because we were doing all right. We were saving. We were definitely saving in our 401ks and in our Roths and things like that. But we never really saw our savings account go up. And that was that lifestyle creep that kept coming in, even though we were making more. And so to find this idea that, wait, I don't need to make $10 million to retire early. The idea that you could actually sort of take a slow sip on your earnings for a long extended period of time, and that it wasn't that difficult to realize was a game changer. It was a total game changer. And then what was really cool was to go from learning all of that to then discovering the Frugal Woods and J.L. Collins and the Wealthy Accountant and the Mad Scientists and Coach Carson and Vicki Robin, all of these people that were they were either talking about what it was like in practice or going down a deeper rabbit hole on some of these various themes and ideas and ways. It was really cool to see that and to see that there was more options to sort of soak up all of this information. And I'm sure you guys understand, once you get excited about something, you can't get enough. And so, it was just amazing to learn about all these fascinating folks who had really set up a lot of blogs and podcasts to share their experiences and learn with others. And what I loved about it the absolute most was I found an incredible community who actually seemed to treat each other with respect, expand on ideas. They challenged each other and seemed to get to know each other even in the comment sections of blogs. I mean, how many online communities can you say that about where you actually see respect?
One of the things that's interesting, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, is so you have now found the FI community and you've gone deep and you found all these influencers that frankly have had an impact on my life as well. So I can appreciate what you're saying. But now what I'm wondering is you've kind of been a victim of lifestyle creep, if you want to say, or you've let this lifestyle creep occur for the last several years. And now you've decided to make a change, but you're also married. Your wife, was she on board with this?
Exactly. Yeah. So my family, they know that I get excited about things and then I kind of get all consumed by them. And there's probably a little bit of head patting going on and, okay, here we go again. And I think they all love me for it. But this was something that wasn't going away. And basically, I started to slowly share my discoveries with my wife. And honestly, the discoveries were met with a whole heck of a lot of skepticism. And that's probably part and due to my fault in the sense of what she's used to. But also, I think some of the things I was telling her, because I would really share the big discoveries, the big aha moments. I think they were probably just too good to be true to her. And so what I did was I slowly started to sort of tease some articles to her. And I can't thank Mr. Money Mustache enough for this forever, is that I think what's so special about him is the way he puts things into perspective. It's hard to argue. And they're so well thought out, well researched, and well put that they're hard to argue against. And so that whole skepticism, because you're hearing all of these ideas probably for the first time and you've never heard them before. And I think one of my first thoughts, and I believe one of my wife's first thoughts was, why isn't everybody doing this then? And you almost say it in the sense of, so I don't believe you. And right. So, and so that was really exciting. And so I would share some of those major blogs with her. I think I honestly set up the path that Mr. Money Mustache sets. I think there are about 4 blog posts that he recommends right off the bat. And I teased those out. I teased them to my wife. I teased them to her parents and my own. I wanted people to read these things. And I waited a little while. I was actually patient because I knew I shouldn't take all that credit. I had a gut feeling that this was a big deal. And I wanted to do it right. And I got really lucky. I actually had a stroke of clarity one day and realized I should look into this and see if there's any suggestions on how to introduce this. And
so you decided to use a strategy. You decided to leave the blunt hammer at home.
I thought a soft touch might actually work in this case. Yeah.
And Scott, it's so funny when you were describing yourself as somebody who dives into things and the people around you, people who love you, kind of maybe look at you like, oh, here he goes again. Jonathan and I looked at each other and we're both thinking we do the exact same thing. Jonathan, maybe a little more than I do.
Brad was pointing at me. He's trying to be nice now.
I was pointing at him because he sounds like the exact parallel.
If my wife were listening to this right now, she would be like, oh, another one.
Like I said, a moment of clarity and total stroke of luck. I managed to bring a little strategy into it. And I don't remember anymore how I found this or who I was listening to or what I read, but I loved this idea of framing it around happiness. And I knew that would be the way to my wife's heart. and into her mind, because I know that that's important to her. You know, we do share a lot of the same interests and goals, and that's why we're happily married. And I know that this is a major point to the FIRE community. And I've heard this discussed on your podcast and many other places. And it's funny to hear, I believe, Jonathan, you were even talking about how the dynamics between, I think it took you a while to come around. It's interesting to hear people's hesitation towards this. And I'm sure there's a ton of reasons for it. And it probably stems a lot from people's past, probably to some extent some fear of the future. But for my wife and I, if we're anything, we do try to pursue happiness. And hence moving to this insanely expensive island. It was, well, everybody says that's crazy, so let's do it. And so I just asked her to write down a list. I said, please just write down 5 to 10 things that make you happy on a weekly basis. And the weekly thing was interesting because one of the things I've learned from this, I think one of the most impactful light bulb moments for me heading down this path has by far and away been this idea of stop looking at expenses on a monthly basis and look at it on a 10-year basis. That is a game changer for me, regardless of whether we even invest our money well in the future, or if the stock markets that have been on an absolute tear start crumbling down. At the very least, I know that if I'm looking at the long-term ideas of 10 years, if I'm looking at the long-term implications of our financial actions over 10 years, that we're going to be better off. And so to put that in framework for her, I thought this is going to be a long-term process. So let me start thinking about what the short-term implications are. And when it comes to happiness, I thought, okay, we'll write down a list of the 5 to 10 things that make you happy on a weekly basis. And I brought the list with me. I thought we might talk about this today. And I have it right here. And here is my wife's list. Read her baby a book. Listen to her baby laugh. Have coffee with her husband, have a glass of wine at night, eat delicious chocolate, ride bikes with our family, go for a walk, and spend time with our parents and our family.
I noticed that spending money is nowhere on that list.
The only 2 things that cost money are wine and chocolate. And so I thought to myself, there's the compromise. You can have your wine and chocolate if you will follow me on this journey.
I love it. I've never heard that anywhere else. And my wife will soak that up as well. I'm absolutely going to duplicate that. But that is fantastic.
And yes, Scott, the focus on happiness is what I know I talk about all the time here on this podcast. FI allows us to kind of step outside of our regular lives, right? The hamster wheel that we talked about earlier. Everyone just goes through the motions and you just kind of do things habitually and you don't think about it, right? You don't put the space between the stimulus and the response. It just happens automatically. And when you stop and say, oh, wow, there's a different way to look at life, take that pause. Then you can focus on what's important. And the way that you approach it with your wife, I think is absolutely brilliant, which is focusing on happiness, right? And realizing that these things are about connection, human connection. I say this over and over here. And every single thing on this list is precisely that. And it costs very little money, wine and chocolate. So that, I think, was a brilliant way to approach it. And when you frame it with happiness and long-term happiness, and then, financial stability for decades to come. I mean, this is such like a winning strategy and such a winning approach to life that, I'm very impressed. So just wanted to jump in there with that.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. And the other thing that was really interesting about this list was nearly all of these things were agnostic to our location. This beautiful and insanely expensive island of Coronado in the beautiful and insanely expensive state of California. Ultimately, we can ride bikes, go for walks, spend time with our families, listen to our baby laugh nearly anywhere. And so that really took me down another rabbit hole, which was, do we need to leave? And California, the state income tax here is pretty nuts. It has to be one of the most expensive states in this country, if not the most. I think New York is right up there, maybe Illinois. And I started looking around, and my wife is actually from the Pacific Northwest. I'm from the Midwest. And Washington State, my wife's from a little town outside of Seattle, and Washington State has 0% state income tax.
Geo arbitrage at its finest.
Let's go, Tim Ferriss. I did a little research and found out, I believe he actually coined the term geo arbitrage.
Is that his? Is that ownership, Brad?
I don't know. I mean, I know he's been talking about that for a decade at least. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me. But yeah, I'm not sure precisely.
He might. You might have made a point there. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, and geo arbitrage was for me the easiest first step because we don't mind moving, or at least I don't. Being a Navy brat, I moved like 13 times before I got to high school. And so I started looking around and realized, and I'll share some details with you guys. I realized that if we moved out of the state of California and were able to continue to earn the level that we were earning, we would save close to $20,000 a year just by moving to another state. And I did a little calculation, and if we were to invest that $20K into investments over 10 years with a 5% rate of return, we'd have $251,721 just for moving.
Wow, that's amazing.
That does not include the cost of living savings that we will absolutely achieve moving out of one of the most expensive zip codes in this country.
Right, because everything is less expensive when you leave those high cost of living areas. I know, when I left Long Island, New York, and moved to Richmond, it's everything. It's things that you don't even think of. I mean, obviously food, but even just like car insurance. My car insurance is maybe a quarter of what it was on Long Island. And it's just, you have many of these things. So yeah, I totally hear you there.
And one of the things is your business is more or less location independent, right? Am I right about that?
We are very blessed. My wife she works remote, and her work is remote. It is focused on the West Coast, so we will have to stay on the West Coast. Probably the furthest east we can go is Denver. And for me, as a video producer, there's a lot of work all over this country, and I've established a pretty successful video production company with a couple guys here in San Diego. We've done very well for ourselves, but I would say 80% of our work was out of town, and so it is very location agnostic. So we are very blessed in that light. And honestly, we intend to continue to pursue interests that will be able to keep us remote.
Hey, Scott, so just to go back for a minute. So you said a quote there that it was really fascinating to me. The easiest first step, you said, was moving. And now that is fascinating because for most people, that's the hardest step. I know a ton of people from back home in New York who I talk to about this, and it sounds great in theory and they'd love to make a move like we did, but there's just that pull of home, right? And it's not easy to leave family and friends and a place that you've known for decades. And now I understand, obviously, like you said, you're a Navy brat and you've moved around, but it sounds like Coronado is home at this point for you. So to me, when you said that, like the easiest first step is moving, that's a very interesting statement. And I'd love to hear, so from when you first approach your wife with, hey, I heard this podcast, let's make a list of what makes you happy, to we're moving, talk me through that process. Cause that's not for most people, that's not an overnight thing. It's not like in 1 week we decide, hey, I listened to a podcast, we're moving, right? Talk me through that.
This is the impetus for a lot of the eye rolling I get from my family. I get a little ahead of myself, and thank you for bringing me back down to earth. You're right. I look at it like that. My wife does not. She grew up living in one place her whole life. And like I said, has that wanderlust, but absolutely Coronado's become home to both of us. But I think it's going to be a lot harder for her to move than it is for me. I've moved out of this place so many times. It kind of feels like second nature. I don't get tied to one place, but I totally understand that. And I honestly, my entire family from my mom and my dad's side nearly all live in one small town in Iowa. And I am blessed to be able to go back and see my huge extended family, and most or all of them when I go back. And so I understand the pull to stay in a place like that where you do have that extended family and you have that help for childcare and for all the little things that come up. The support system of family can't be denied. There's no doubt. And I think something that's really important to mention here is you can pursue these things without moving. There's no doubt about that. I mean, just getting a grasp on your expenses and knowing where to put the excess money is by far and away a lesson that I don't know about you guys, but growing up, I don't know a lot of people that really had a huge education in that. And if they did, they weren't sharing it with me. And that's what I love about this so much, is that there's so much sharing going on. But to get back to the moving idea is for me, that was the easiest short-term decision to make, to find major gains. And that is specific to our situation, being how we live in an incredibly expensive zip code in an incredibly expensive state. I would say people who live in those expensive states probably feel that and know and feel that a little more coming from me. But there's a lot of places in this country that just don't even touch this cost of living. And so yeah, for us in our particular situation, that was a main driver. But this wasn't a decision that happened overnight. And we looked at it really hard. And one of the things that I kind of came to use as sort of an impetus was, I'm in this job that's 9 to 5 that keeps me away from my family. If I get out of that job and we move, our savings alone from making that happen will justify me quitting my job. And so if I give myself a year to pursue a documentary and really pursue my dreams as an independent filmmaker, I mean, who can argue with that?
So what does that actual conversation look like with your wife? How do you go about saying, you know what, let's do this. Let's make this actual move. We know that we can make it work, but how do you actually get her to say yes to this vision?
Yeah. So the thing is whether we move to Washington or not, it's really about this geo arbitrage idea. And that was something, I mean, moving my wife out of this place that is so idyllic and perfect for her, was not going to be easy. And you know, it's not absolutely necessary by any means, but for me, I started thinking about it and I realized, okay, we're paying an insane amount of money in rent. We have 2 full-time jobs. We need to pay a nanny to watch our child. So now I'm paying somebody to watch my kid when I would rather watch my kid. And I'm going to work to raise the money necessary to pay that person. So half of my day is spent just working so that I can afford to have somebody else watch my child.
Feels like a hamster wheel.
That is the definition, right? And so I started looking at that and thinking, okay, not only will we save X amount by moving from this state to a state that's cheaper, because nearly every state in the country is cheaper than this one, we'll also save so much money on rent, on childcare, on cost of living in general. And I started looking at that against my own salary and realized that we could maybe make this into sort of an adventure. Why don't we spend some time looking into the places we're considering thinking about moving to? I mean, my wife and I have been sort of, Zillow addicts for years, where we'll just kind of go on there and look in our own areas, or look in what we hear is an upcoming neighborhood, or look in other cities that maybe we go and explore or visit, just to see what the cost of living is like. We love real estate. We always have. And so we started looking into some of these various cities. We looked at Bend, Oregon, and Boise, Idaho, and Fort Collins, Colorado, and Spokane, Washington. And these are all areas where we feel like we can really hit some geo arbitrage, where the cost of living is significantly lower than what we're accustomed to. And I thought, why don't we make this a year-long adventure? I had a job that I was going to 9 to 5. I liked the job, but I was spending a lot of time there. And I didn't feel like my returns were equal to that amount of time. And that cost of living was actual life with my family. That was the cost to me. And so I sort of came to my wife and just pitched this to her. Hey, what if I quit my job? What if we go across the country for the next year? And what if we go live with your parents for a couple of months up in Seattle in the summer when it's absolutely perfect? And then we go to Iowa and live with my parents for a couple of months in the fall in Iowa when it's absolutely beautiful, and give them a chance to spend as much time as we can with our kid. And there's nothing better than that. And then after we've geo arbitraged with our in-laws for a while, we've saved up a nice amount of money, and we can go and spend some time in these places that we're thinking about living and really understand what it's like to live there. Spend a month there instead of a weekend, and make a really rational and educated decision on what's the next place where we can still achieve a lot of the same things that we love about Coronado, like bike riding and parks and a sense of community and being able to bike ride to the grocery store and all these things. And that was sort of the push. And I pitched it to her, and it wasn't like an overnight success thing, but one morning we were bike riding over to swim lessons, actually, with our little 18-month-old. And it's just like the best Saturday morning, heading down to the pool, and she's all excited with her little helmet. And it's just like, it's so perfect. And we're happy. But, and that makes it even more difficult to make the decision. And I'm riding alongside my wife, and I'm thinking what's going on through her head is probably, I can't believe he's making me move. And she turns to me and says, what if we get a camper and do all of this on the road?
Wow.
I was like, I love you.
Well, there's so many different things here. One is that you're fixated now on the pursuit of happiness, that you're thinking, how can I game this out to claw back my time and increase my happiness and that of my family? And what you find is that money goes from being the primary focus to now a tool that you can use to buy your freedom and also allow you to pursue this happiness. I think that's kind of this restructuring, this reframing. And I love that as you start to get closer and closer to this concept, that reframing is the same thing that has occurred in my life as well. And what I find, ultimately, it is not the pursuit of money for me. Getting a larger paycheck does not ultimately do it for me. In fact, I'm willing to make less in order to have more happiness. I think that's just a very interesting kind of reframing of a situation. And it doesn't have to be that way. Certainly you could make more, you could hit it big, but when your focus is the pursuit of your family's happiness, you don't need to make the multi-six-figure income. You're able to make decisions based on what will make you happy.
And it's not necessarily about income either. You're talking about major expenses, Scott, that you're going to cut out immediately, right? $2,850 a month is $34,000 a year. Plus, if you're paying a nanny, which you were talking about, I mean, I imagine that has to be fairly expensive in California, right? So
we were paying $2,500 a month.
Wow.
For childcare.
Holy cow. Okay, that's even more. So just right there, that's $64,000 a year, and that's after tax money. So I mean, that's crazy. I mean, if you're in a high income tax bracket, that's $100,000 of pre-tax income. I mean, just spending on your nanny and on your rent. So I mean, that is gone. I mean, that's $100,000
annually.
That's absolutely incredible.
So now take that and put that in your 10-year projection. Game changer.
That's exactly right. And, the light bulb from my wife that got her to the point where we were riding our bikes to swim lessons and her suggesting that we rent a camper or buy a camper for a year was when I ran the calculations on the length in which it would take for us to retire based off of a few parameters. I showed my wife, if we can get our expenses down to $50,000 a year, which I think is relatively reasonable, and from what I hear is very reasonable, according to this community online that I've been researching.
It's pretty much impossible in your current environment, right?
Almost literally impossible in our current environment. Yes. We could do it in San Diego, but we'd have to move so far east. We'd be living in 120-degree desert. And so, yes, it's nearly impossible where we're at. And I ran that and I said, okay, if we can maintain our earnings and get our expenses down to $50,000 a year with our current net worth, we're projected to retire in about 5 to 7 years.
Nice. Wow.
And that was so pivotal for me, for her. That was met with a ton of skepticism at first, but I think that started to wash over. And I think that started to really frame it out for her. She was saying, okay, even if you're wrong on a pretty decent scale, we're still looking at 10 or 12 years. Let's double it, say 14. That's still significantly less time than we had assumed prior. And I think that's really what got her there. And so that was our journey. And, for me, I really started thinking about it and I thought, we're in a really unique position. I'm quitting my job. We're picking up our life. We're going to go check out a bunch of different states and it's going to be hard. I'm talking about this with enthusiasm, guys, because I'm excited. I'm personally excited for the journey, for the adventure, and I'm used to this stuff. I was brought up this way, but not everybody is. And I just want to make sure it's very clear. I know that there's going to be a lot of trial and tribulation. This is not going to be all roses all the time. And at the same time, I thought, one of the things that this community has given me is this light bulb moment, this idea that we can actually get out of this grind, out of this hamster wheel, spend more time with our family, our daughter, becoming happy. And ultimately, this takes us down a lot of other paths where if we have that much free time and we have additional capital, you start looking at effective altruism and philanthropy and things like that I have always wanted to pursue. I mean, everything from the lionfish taking over the coral reefs in the Keys to cleaning up the beaches over here on the West Coast to cures for the blind. I mean, there's a lot of pursuits that matter to me, that matter to my wife, that we would love to spend time doing, but we've gotten ourselves in a situation where we don't even have the time barely to spend with our family, with ourselves, with our friends, to have extra time to spend on those in need. And all of this just adds up. And I thought, we're in this really unique position to spend the next year of our life pursuing this. And what if we can document that? And while we pursue this, can we go around and actually meet these people that have given us such a gift and learn more from them, learn who they are, learn about these eclectic characters, this mishmash of people all over the world who have come together online to figure out a way to hack our lives in today's society. That is such an exciting story to tell. And to think that I could somehow allow and give people a perspective to eliminate as many excuses as possible to pursue this lifestyle, while also showcasing the incredible characters that are involved in this community. To me, that's a pursuit worth taking a year off for, taking a year to explore. I don't know how I lose in that situation. So yeah, that's what we decided to do. And my wife's on board and super supportive, and as she always is, and she thinks I'm crazy, and we'll see how it goes.
Wow, that's incredible. I can't believe how that story comes together. That's a light bulb moment for me on so many different levels. And it's such a contrast because most people, especially those stuck on the hamster wheel, spend all their free time, their very limited amount of free time, just doing laundry and landscaping, because every other minute they have is dedicated to their 9 to 5. I want to be in the community that has utterly crushed the hamster wheel by being willing to make some slightly more optimized choices over an extended period of time. They have purchased their freedom, and now they can dedicate that space to the people they care about and the projects they get passionate about. They're exploring these ideas like this effective altruism. How cool is it to have this community that's focused on these ideas, to see what these people are doing with their free time, to see how people come from different walks of life and explore this very cool world where time is a tool that they have in their back pocket. What do you do when your entire day is not locked down to the mundane activities of the hamster wheel? Very inspiring, Scott. Thank you so much for sharing.
And Scott, what I'm struck by is time, but in a different way. So we're actually recording this on July 13th, and the Mr. Money Mustache episode with Tim Ferriss came out on February 13th. So that's 5 months, right? So you got in touch with us, what has to be probably 2 months ago at this point, right? So 3 months, you made the decision. You knew nothing about this. You dove in as much as you possibly could. You had this life-changing conversation with your wife, and then decided to take a year of your life on this adventure and create this documentary. I mean, that is a remarkable timeline in every possible way, right? Like, that is truly incredible to me. So lead us up to when you got in touch with us, when you got in touch with other people in the FI community, when this documentary became real.
Absolutely. I had been diving into all of these resources online, and I came across your podcast by searching for podcasts that Mr. Money Mustache had appeared on or had been talked about on. I was soaking up Radical Personal Finance and The Mad Fientist, and I found ChooseFI. And I thought one of the things that you guys gave to me and my wife was the Pillars of FI episode. That episode was one that I sent to my wife early on. And she came back she was driving up to LA on a work trip. And on the way back, she asked me for a podcast to listen to. And I sent her that one. I felt like that was a really nice, succinct way to sort of put all this into a bottle and say, here, this is essentially what we're talking about doing. And she came back raving about how she felt like Jonathan and Brad were guys that she could relate with. And that was something that I hadn't really realized before, that she was looking for something maybe a little more relatable. And I even had put that particular episode in an email that I was starting to send out to friends and family who I would inevitably talk about this subject matter with, and they had asked me for more information. So I ended up putting together an email that kind of laid out in succession how they should consume the major ideals. And that included some blog posts from Mr. Money Mustache and The Mad Fientist, and some podcasts like Tim Ferriss and from your podcast. And I felt like it absolutely fit within that framework. But she came back just so excited because she felt like it was so relatable in a way that she could take it in and really process it, and maybe even share it with her friends and her family in a way that made her comfortable. And so I can't thank you guys enough for that. But that was a major, major pillar of what brought me to you in the first place. Is I thought, okay, if I'm going to make this documentary, I need to start meeting people within this community and start getting to know them and start getting on their radar, to be honest, because I've been doing video production for a long time. And to get in and interview somebody, to get in and to learn more about their lives, there's a major level of trust that needs to be established. And there's that barrier that needs to be broken down very quickly. And with you guys seeming so relatable, I thought it might be a great way to sort of kick everything off. And knowing that you had an up and coming podcast, and yet that Brad had been a part of this community for a long period of time, I thought, what better way than to talk to you guys and hopefully kind of throw this idea off of you and see if you guys think it would be a good idea. I believe the first time we spoke, I even asked, are you familiar with any other documentaries out there that I haven't found? Just to make sure. Because I honestly, to some extent, I felt like pinching myself when I realized that there hadn't been really any extensive video work done around this community at all.
It's shocking, isn't it? I think I've mentioned before. I mean, I was just watching one the other day called Fed Up, talking about processed food. I haven't watched all these, but I know for a fact that there have been several documentaries about different subcultures, anything from King of Kong looking at arcade subculture to Dogtown and the Z-Boys looking at skate culture. Health and wellness has gotten several documentaries as well. I mentioned Fed Up earlier, but more in like the bodybuilding vein. You've seen things like Pumping Iron. I mean, and certainly there have been thousands of documentaries that have highlighted unique aspects of different cultures. There was an entire documentary about people that appreciate Star Trek, but how is it that somehow we have missed the stealth wealth community? It's crazy to me that this has just gone under the radar.
Yeah, I think the minimalists are the closest thing I could find. And, I think they have some really nice messaging in that documentary, but ultimately it really just scratches the surface of what we're talking about here. And this is something that I just feel so compelled to share with the world. And I think it will benefit so many people. Honestly, I don't mean to have delusions of grandeur, but I think if this was something that was taught in college, in high school, how many people would be less angry and how much better off would we all be? And how would we make decisions as a society, as a country, if everybody had this type of knowledge that could really de-stress our lives and get us off of this hamster wheel which just doesn't seem to be working or helping? And by the way, this doesn't mean that we all need to go quit our jobs and live on a farm. I mean, that's not what this is about. And some people may do that and that brings them happiness, and that's great. But it's not to not pursue things that matter. It's just to pursue them in a way that keeps happiness on the forefront and allows us to advance in a way that's not also slowly killing us.
That reminds me of something that I've heard Brad say many times, specifically that the less angry part was very striking to me. And I think just separating yourself from that paycheck to paycheck mentality. The other half of what you said is how this is truly life-changing. I think that's what the point I was getting to when I was talking about some of those documentaries earlier. There are lots of documentaries that are informative, that give you information, but there are a much smaller subset of documentaries that are truly life-changing. And I just think to some of the reviews that we've seen on iTunes, how many times someone has said life-changing information. And they're not saying ChooseFI is life-changing. They're saying this concept, this idea of FI changed my life. It was my light bulb moment. I'm switching up everything because I had this epiphany. And that's what this documentary can be. That's what this idea can be. And the biggest thing is you don't know what you don't know until you do. And I can't imagine a better way to get a message that can change your life than to put it on a mainstream format, to get it into some sort of media distribution platform like Netflix or Amazon Prime.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the goal. And so, I started thinking about the characters that needed to be featured in this documentary. And I think there's plenty of people that I think should be in this documentary, but there's plenty of people that I haven't heard of or haven't met yet who may also very well be perfect for this documentary. I want to be involved in this community as much as I want to get outside of the community and get varying opinions and get different points of view, but ultimately share the value that this community brings and show all of its reach. And so, yeah, I reached out to you guys, and I know we plan to film out in Richmond in the coming months. I'm very excited. I've been connected to FinCon in Dallas. We'll be going out there. I'm really excited to hit Dallas. I am going to be joining the first week of the Chautauqua out in Ecuador. I can't wait for that. I'm hoping to meet and get to know a lot of the people out there who are featured speakers and guests, and Cheryl, who runs it. They've all just been amazing, and I can't wait to share that week with them. I've been invited to the Camp Mustache Southeast in Florida, and hope to spend a few days out there with that amazing community. And we'll see where that takes us. That's kind of the beginning, and we're just getting started. It costs a little bit of money to travel around and put people up in hotels and get an audio tech and maybe a PA. And there's also the production considerations to take into account. There's going to be gear rentals and crew and meals and all those things. So yeah, hopefully we can raise a small amount of money to make a huge impact.
Absolutely, Scott. And I can speak for Brad and myself that we want to support you in this project in any way possible. And so we are going to do our part to help spread this, hopefully among the FI community in general, so there's more people talking about it. Obviously, we'll be continuing to mention it on our Friday roundups and upcoming shows. So we are thrilled that you brought this project to us. And frankly, we're thrilled that you're doing this from the inside instead of someone looking at it from the outside and saying, let's go ahead and film these people and see what they're doing inside of this little glass box. This is someone that has found it, and you're making radical changes in your own life, and you're wanting to share how awesome this journey has been for you with the watching world. And I think that is the reason that Brad and I are so excited about you being the one to do this project.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect story, really, because to imagine that you just found this concept 5 months ago and you're upending your entire life because you feel so strongly about it, that is really impactful to me. And like we always say here, the fire is spreading, right? That's our entire concept, because we truly believe that FI is a life superpower, and it's a way to reframe life where you focus on the important things. You focus on the people in your life. You focus on happiness, and that is why we want to spread this message. And Jonathan and I are very aware, and we try to say that ChooseFI is not about us, and certainly the FI community is not about us at all. We are just trying to spread this message as much as we can from our little corner of the podcasting world. And I think people are resonating with it, like your wife did, right? She heard this message from two just normal guys. And I think people appreciate that. And I think people are going to appreciate your point of view, telling the story that you're doing this and you're traveling around, and this is an adventure that's focusing on happiness. And that just means so very much to me. And that's why I've just been so thrilled to learn about your project. And I want to help you in any way that I possibly can, just because I want this message to spread. And I think this is a wonderful avenue for it. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Scott, for doing this.
And Scott, do we have a working title for this yet?
Yes. The working title, I believe this idea came out of an email between you guys, right? Yeah. And we were joking around and saying we were playing with fire. And so I think that title is just it's perfect. My wife and I are literally going to go out. We're going to go play with fire. We're taking some risks with our life. I'm quitting my job. We're uprooting our life. We're moving. And yet, at the same time, I understand that, I just pitched that as this is a much easier decision to make once you frame it the right way. But that being said, we're going to go out and play with fire. We're going to go learn more about the fire community and the FI community. And maybe we'll finally put an end to whether it's the FI community, the fire community, the stealth wealth community.
Nice. All right, Scott. Well, before we let you go, we do want to offer you the chance to tackle the hot seat. You ready for this?
I am.
All right, let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the ChooseFI Hot Seat.
All right, Scott, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
Yeah, so I'm not much of a blog fanatic. My go-to is podcasts, Reddit browsing, book reading, things like that. But, I know this has been said a million times, but Mr. Money Mustache is truthfully the number one blog that I check in with regularly and have read from beginning to end. I'm not sure there's a substitute that currently exists to grasp this FIRE lifestyle, challenge your assumptions, kick your ass in gear and help explain it to others.
No, it is good. It's definitely back to the basics and walks you through it. He will face punch you into submission. Now, your favorite article of all time, was that a mustache article?
It's not, actually. There's a blog, which I think has been mentioned here before, called Wait But Why? And there's an article called Artificial Intelligence Revolution. And the idea is so mind-boggling that it actually changed the way I perceive the world to some extent. And it's a very almost scary article, but it is my favorite article. I talk about it at a lot of, with friends and dinners and things like that. And the idea is really that we really just need to try to survive until about 2045, because if you make it there, or so, one of two things are going to happen. And it's either going to be we'll live forever or we're all done.
Skynet is coming.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I think my friends and family are tired of my financial independence dinner conversation. So maybe I can pivot over to something more optimistic like artificial intelligence taking over the world next time. All right. Question number 3, your favorite life hack.
Yeah, besides fire, which is my all-time favorite life hack, I would say meditation. I like to jump on mindfulness, the app Mindfulness, and just take 15 minutes to myself. It's incredible. It's one of those long-term gains that once you do it for a long period of time, I don't know, for me, I was able to sleep better, interact with people better, have more patience, be more present. And it's amazing how much we, sort of neglect the largest muscle in our body, our mind.
Yeah, I agree completely. I use the Headspace app and just absolutely love it. But I'll check out the mindfulness app that you mentioned. All right, Scott, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
Yeah, hands down, it would be the amount of student loans I racked up. I had about $38K to pay down when it was all said and done. And I made my final payment last year at 33 years old. And I definitely popped a bottle of champagne when that happened. I recognized that was a huge deal. But I just think about all the wasteful spending I had in college. And I worked in college, but not enough to actually maintain that lifestyle. Or support that lifestyle. So that's by far the biggest financial mistake I've made in my life.
Our generation is kind of this transitional generation, and things were rapidly changing as we were growing up, and school was changing, education was changing, the value of education was changing, and to put it bluntly, the cost of education was changing. There's so many people that I know personally that came out with $60,000, $90,000 in student loan debt. And the estimated income for the job that they got trained for was $40,000 a year. And it's almost one of those things where you can never recover from that using traditional methods. Very, very much. It is the biggest financial mistake for hundreds of thousands of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, to take nearly 10 years to pay off is outrageous.
All right. Question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
I would have listened to my first, biggest financial mistake, and then also invested in property as early as possible my first year of college, and let my roommates help me pay a mortgage down. I lived in Iowa City. I went to school, University of Iowa. I lived there for 6 years, and I made a ton of great friends who I ended up living with most of the time. So this idea that you could actually live with your friends and trust them and have them help you pay down a mortgage, that would be advice I would give my younger self. And also to own some property in the college town that I love so much would just be a bonus.
Oh, I love that second look at that particular situation. So you do the house hacking, you bring your friends in on it, and then afterwards you still own property in a college town. Very, very cool. We do have a bonus question if you're up for it. Your favorite purchase that you made on Amazon.com last year, or if you don't use Amazon or didn't use Amazon, just your favorite purchase in general.
So it's a book. It's called What Do You Do With an Idea by Kobe Yamada. And what I love about this book is it teaches kids at a very young age that ideas are special and that one idea can change the world. And it's such a powerful message and really applicable to this conversation that I just wanted to share that with your audience and say that I highly recommend this book. Probably any kids, around 2.5, 3 years old is a great time to start reading this to them.
That's awesome. One additional favor, I really like the idea that you pieced together this email that you're using to share with friends and family. Would you mind forwarding us a copy of that email so we can send it out to the people on our email list, just so maybe they can see how you're introducing people that you're close to this concept?
Yeah, I would love that. I was actually looking for that when I put that together myself, because I was just trying to save some time, see if anybody else had already put that together. But yeah, I'd be happy to send my little curated email.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing your vision. We will be following you and supporting you with interest, and it's going to be a wonderful year. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you guys. Honestly, Jonathan, I can't stress enough how much it means to me to understand what I'm trying to do here and know what I'm doing. And Brad, your support has been tremendous. And I wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. I wouldn't be able to do it without the community. can't wait to start involving the Facebook group and really the entire community to tell this story. This isn't about me. I actually struggled with whether to put myself in front of the camera. I just think it's the best route to take to eliminate excuses because we're going to live it. And so I welcome feedback. I relish it. And in fact, it's already starting to happen. You know, the way you put yourself out in the universe and the universe responds. And I have one story I want to share. You guys actually mentioned me on a podcast a few weeks back, which I can't thank you enough for. And somebody here in San Diego was listening and didn't know that I was living in San Diego and looked me up, getting excited about a documentary, figured out that I was in San Diego and reached out. And we had lunch a couple of weeks ago. And this gentleman opened my eyes to so many different concepts. He's already achieved FI. He's already excited about effective altruism. And the lunch was it was really rich with conversation. We probably spent 2 hours sitting there. And I mean, I can't tell you how exciting that was. And it's just an amazing testament to the people in this community and how this thing is already going. So that is due in large part to your influence. I can't thank you guys enough for having me on today and for supporting this. And I can't wait to see what we make.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And to our community, again, if you're interested in the documentary project and you want to learn more and follow along the journey, Scott will be sharing updates and what goes on behind the scenes at playingwithfire.co, playingwithfire.co. The fire is spreading, my friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.